Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QT2 Systems podcast series, My Life as a Pro. I'm very pleased today to welcome our featured guest of the day, Angela Naeth. Welcome, Angela.
Thanks. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to start with how you got into the sport of triathlon. Can you talk a little bit about your first race and what brought you to the sport?
Yeah, I was always an active child, and I actually got a track and field scholarship to Columbia, Missouri. And so I went to college there, and uh, when I finished college and all that, I went back home and I still had the athletic bug. And I learned about triathlon actually when I was 10 years old. I remember seeing it on TV and just being enthralled that they swam, they biked, and they ran. And I met a few people in college that did triathlon, and I started riding bikes. But I never put it all together. I was a lifeguard and did all sorts of different things. So after college, I kind of just was on the internet, and I'm like, I want to try triathlon. And so there was a triathlon, I say local, but it was about 4 hour drive away from my hometown. So I asked my mom if she could drive me, and we decided to go on a road trip. And so I went to this little triathlon that was an indoor pool, swim. And it was like a 30K bike and an 8 kilometer trail run. Um, and this is in Canada, so obviously everything's in kilometers. So I went there and I was like looking at all sorts of things and figuring it out. And long story short, I ended up winning the event, and I was so excited and so stoked about it that I was like, I'm gonna go to the Olympics. I'm gonna do all this. So then when I got home, I just started researching like coaches and what it takes to be on the national team and all this kind of stuff. Um, I ended up hiring a coach that was somewhat local down in Vancouver, BC. Worked with him for about a year, and he just saw that I lived up in this northern BC, super wintry, and it was really hard for him to coach me because I did so much inside, and there wasn't a lot of triathlons. And so I ended up searching again on the internet and found a triathlon camp in California, and it was just kind of like a group dynamic, and it got me out of the cold winter. And so I went down to California, and the coach there was an ex-pro triathlete, and he was a little bit blown away of how I could ride a bike. And he just was asking all these questions, and I'm like, well, I just ride inside, you know. And so he offered to coach me for free, and he said, you know, you really could go pro here. And so of course I jumped at that, and he coached me for a couple years. And the very first race that I entered that summer, I ended up winning and getting my pro card in Canada for a half Ironman. And so then I got my pro card. And so the catapult learning curve was massive for me. I mean, it had to be. And at the time, I was working full time as a physical therapist, and I was convinced that I really, really wanted to see the world and do this triathlon thing and really give it a shot. And so, with my coach's help in terms of supporting that dream, but nothing other than that, like no finances or anything, he said, "Yeah, I'll coach you." I ended up leaving Canada with literally $2,000 in my pocket, a bike, and a bag. And it was me in a dream. My parents thought I was completely nuts. At the time, I was living with my ex-boyfriend, and we were kind of going separate ways already. But I had to see if I had what it took, and I didn't even know what I was getting myself into. So I lived very, very meager, like completely meager. And to make this long story short, I ended up just jumping into a ton of races. Like every 2 weeks, I'd race a half Ironman and half Ironman. And I was considered the bridesmaid versus the bride because I would get second place, second place, second place. But all of those second places kind of added up some finances for me because I just put it in the bank, put it in the bank, put it in the bank, and lived. I mean, I can go on stories about how meager I lived. I lived in a tent for a while. Like it's very meager. It's not something that I think many people would even dream or think of doing to kind of follow their own dreams. But I was determined, and I ended up winning my very first half Ironman at Boulder 70.3 in 2009, actually. And that kind of just catapulted things for me. And I slowly built up a name, got a manager, and progressed things from there. I mean, there was a lot of ups and downs with that, but then I jumped into Ironman in 2013. Um, and I started I started looking at different coaches. And so I worked with Mark Allen for a few years. He was amazing to me. At the same time, I was training some in Tucson and met Doug McLean from QT2. And so we became really, really good friends. And he kept raving about QT2 and Jesse and the methodologies. And I was working with Mark at the time, and we talked about nutrition. And I ended up going to a race in Melbourne, and I had a disastrous race because of my nutrition. I just had no idea about nutrition. And I did talk to Jesse prior to that. So I was quite intrigued about QT2, but I was with Mark. And I ended up having a terrible race, and all of these QT2 athletes passed me. And so at that point, it just dinged in my head, like, I need to go back to Jesse and talk to him. So I ended up talking to Jesse, and he took me on as an athlete. And that very first year, I won my first Ironman, and I've won a few Ironmans since then. Went to Kona. He fixed my nutrition. And from Jesse, I then worked with Tim, and I continued working with Tim as his athlete.
Okay. All right. There's a lot. You just went through it.
There's a lot.
I'm going to back you up and ask you a few more questions. So
Yeah.
the first piece, your first race, can you give me sort of do you remember what year that first?
Oh gosh, yes. It was 2005.
Okay. So 2005, you went for a local race, but because of where you live, that local race was
4 hours away. Yeah,
and
I live way up north.
Right. Okay. So you traveled 4 hours to do a pool-based triathlon. You win it and you're like, okay, that's it. I mean, you already knew right there.
Yeah.
This was the sport that was going to take you somewhere, or
well, at least I thought it was. I mean, I won. So I was like,
yeah,
well,
but
great. Little did I know that at the Olympics, you need to learn how to really swim fast and extremely run fast. So
yeah, those dreams, but it was enough. It triggered something in you. So, I mean, ultimately, so the camp in California that you taught, was that like a week, or was it just a few months? Like, what was it like when you mentioned that?
Yeah, it was a week. So my original coach was like, you just have to get out of Prince George. Like it's literally winter for 6 months there. And so I just started searching, and it was a week camp. It started with a century, actually, a local century. And it was just swim, bike, run. And how that all kind of progressed was the century was not part of camp, but I came down early, and I was part of the group that was there for the camp. And the coach was there, and he saw me, and he's like, he kind of brushed me off because I was a female, and that just drove me even more. He's like, well, you might want to start a little bit later because, we're going to be rolling really fast and stuff. And he just basically brushed it off. And I was like, and so I just pinned him. I'm like, I'm going to stay with him. And so slowly we started, and I was right behind him. He had this little mirror on him, and he kept looking back. And by mile 60, it was just myself and him that was left. And then he started talking to me, and he's like, where are you from? Like, how do you know how to ride? And we ended up finishing the century in first together. And he was a bit blown away. And so throughout camp, he kept talking to me and looking at my stroke in this pool, my running. And then he just kind of thought I had something, and took me aside one night and said, I really think you can turn pro. And I jumped at it. So it was a change in my life for sure.
Yeah. So what was the race that you did to get your pro license? Which race was
Yeah, back then, and I think it's still the same now, in Canada, you had to have hit a certain time. I can't remember what the time was. It was 4 hours something, in a half Ironman if you wanted to get your long distance pro card. And so I did a race in outside of Calgary, Alberta. There was I think it was Sylvan Lake Triathlon. It was a half Ironman, and it was my first half Ironman. Didn't know what to expect, but I ended up winning it and getting the pro card there. So I was very excited to say the least. I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Yeah, most people don't go from, I did a pool swim sprint triathlon to, okay. So
well,
then
I was always active, and
yes,
I taught swim lessons. I mean, it's not swimming like freestyle swimming, but I taught kids how to swim, adults how to swim. I got my lifeguard when I was 14, and in Canada, it's a big process to get your lifeguarding, because we actually jump in and save people without with backup, like we don't use a flotation device. We are told and taught to go in. So I had some swim experience, and I think just from that, and then I was always active. I used to ride my bike to track practice all the time. So I did have the athletic abilities, I guess, but I didn't know how to put them all together.
Okay. So, all right, so you got your pro card and that was in 2005 also, or 2006?
That was 2006, yeah.
2006. Okay. And then do you remember your first pro race?
Well, let me see. So I ended up going to California with the $2,000 in my pocket, and there I did California 70.3. At the time, I believe I was just coming back from an injury. I think so. This is a funny story. So I got my pro card, and then I was going to jump into a kind of an ITU race that was in Kelowna, BC. I was living in Penticton at the time, which is very close. And I did the race, and I had a great race. The next day I was told to go for an easy spin. So I'm climbing up this little hill, no, and just like looking at the trees and everything. And I ended up putting I didn't know, I still didn't know how to put my water bottle in my cage in my bike. So I was looking at the cage and doing this. I ended up hitting a parked car and literally just went, and I broke my elbow. And so that kind of just stagnated everything. And I had to get surgery in my elbow and fix it all up. I had an external fixator and all sorts of things. And so I didn't get to race. And so I was just coming back when I moved to California. And so I jumped into California 70.3, but I didn't have the running yet because I couldn't run with the external fixator and stuff. And so I jumped into that. That was my very first kind of experience, but I didn't finish it. But then my second race was Wildflower, which was a very infamous half Ironman. And that was pretty much my very first half that I did as a pro. So it was a great experience. It was super fun.
So what was your feeling when you got to the line as a pro for the first time?
Oh my gosh. I was freaked out of my mind. I had no clue. Like I was like a fish out of water. I was very, very nervous, extremely nervous. And I think what helped me was knowing that I didn't have to finish the race. And so I didn't have all the pressure of trying to compete fully. It was more just like jump in the water and bike as hard as you can. And so I think that stepping stone was actually really, really helpful for me because I had all these pros that I idolized, like that I saw in the magazines. And I mean, it was just so new to me. And I didn't even know anything about like even putting my water bottle in my cage, you know? So extremely scared. But you know, that all kind of goes away when you put yourself in that environment of stress and the gun goes off. I mean, you go with the flow, like you just go. And that's kind of what happened. And then I was able to just turn my brain off. And once I got onto the bike, I had a lot of fun because I was very confident on the bike. And I felt very strong all the time on the bike. So I just went as hard as I could and gained confidence as the miles ticked by.
Mhm. And I mean, you said that you raced a lot, and I was kind of noticing that, but I was looking up on your website earlier, and just that you still race a lot.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean back then I had to. I had no money. There was a time I asked my parents if they could just give me $5,000 and they said no. No. And I mean, I lived meager. I lived at people's basements. I lived in a trailer at one point. I lived on a small little trailer on someone's land in California, and we would just bounce all over, and it was hard. And so I saw racing as my ticket to doing this. Like I had to race to survive, like literally. And at one point I did go in extreme debt because I did have one credit card, and I ended up going home when I was 27 and begged my parents, can I just stay with you for 4 or 5 months and just make money? And they thought I was crazy. They did, but they accepted it. And they actually helped me with a car. And I ended up working 60, 70 hours as a physical therapist and just banking as much money as I could. And then went back into the sport because it was like my second chance. Like it was my last chance. I told my parents, if I don't make it and I can't survive on my own, I'm coming home and I'll be a physical therapist full time hands off.
Okay.
So it was a really big driving force, but then the racing was where I had to go. I mean, was the only way to make money at that time.
So at that point, when you were racing a lot, did you, I mean, now you have a lot of sponsors. Back then, did you have sponsors? Did you have anything else, anyone else out there that
No.
was helping you along the way?
Yeah,
No?
when I first started, I had nothing. They a couple years into it, Avia, this was a shoe company many years ago, and he was at Wildflower, and I ended up talking to him, and he was actually one of my first partners, who gave me he actually bought me a bike, and he painted it Avia, and I had free shoes. So he helped me with the bike because we put you know, their branding all over it and everything, but I never got any money. I never signed a contract. It was just, here's some shoes, here's a bike. So that actually really helped me, because I had some road bike with TT bars on it at the time when I was starting the sport, and so he got me my first triathlon bike, and from there, you know, you get second places, and I'm always of the mindset, if you don't ask, you're not trying. And also, the worst case thing that could happen is they say no. And so I was very ambitious, I guess. I would go into expos and talk to all the people that were in the expos. And one of my first sponsors was Shimano. And every time I made a second place, you know, I would make some money from prize money and stuff. I used to go to homestays. They used to connect us with homestays, so that would help me save money. And I would just put all the money in the bank as much as I could, and just I lived so meager. I can't even fathom doing that now, but I did. And I ended up winning Boulder 70.3 in 2009. And before that race, I was at the expo, and I was in the Shimano booth, and there was a man there, and we just started talking. And I said, so what does it take to be a sponsored athlete? And he's like, well, you have to win. And I said, okay. And he said, and you're going to have to ride our wheels. I'm like, oh, I would love to ride your wheels. And so he's like, okay, well, you know, have fun at the race. And that was the end of it. Well, I ended up winning the race. And the very first thing I did is I ran back to the Shimano booth, and I said, I won. Do I get to be sponsored? And it was more of a joke than anything. But he said, here's my email and my cell. Call me on Monday. So of course I did. And they've been one of my biggest sponsors and my longest sponsors. They've sponsored me since then. So that's almost 15 years I've been with Shimano. And from there, things kind of progressed a little by little. But it was me putting myself out there a ton, and just seeing what could happen. I mean, I think I have that mindset. I have had it ever since I was a child. Like, I've always, you just got to try, you know, if you have faith in something, you go for it. And that's the mentality that I've lived. So it works sometimes.
Yeah. Well, but like you
Make
said, it's like if you go for it and
Mhm.
someone says no, you're no worse off than you were when you started, right? I mean,
Exactly. It's the
and
same
then
thing as a race, you know.
yeah, right. You
Sun
have
rises every day, sun sets every day. You gotta put your dreams on the line, and see what happens.
right, right. Okay, so you win Boulder 70.3. That now starts things going in terms of
Yeah.
sponsorships. And then I think you said your first Ironman was 2013,
Yes. Yeah.
right? Okay.
2012
So
or
what was
2013, but I think it was 2013.
so in the 2009 to 2013, was that you were racing 70.3s?
70.3s every 2 weeks, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I raced. I still had to race a ton. I think I raced probably 10 halves a year, and just traveled a lot. Back then, we got a lot of prize money in 70.3s, and so they were basically the one and only races out there. And so I traveled all over and just raced as many 70.3s as I could.
Okay.
So
And so have you seen that change over time? Like for the time that you've been a pro, have you seen the prize purses? The
yeah,
the
I mean, things have
the
kind of
size?
gone kind of full circle a little bit. Like back then, there were so many 70.3s, and every 70.3 had a really good prize purse, at least to the top 5. And so you could race, there would be 3 70.3s in one weekend at times. So you could literally, try to make money almost every 2 weeks. I mean, and that's basically what happened. And then as the years went by, and then now obviously COVID, things really, really changed where they put prize money in certain races and they didn't pay for other races that weren't there. They kind of changed the dynamics of having a point system and really banking a lot of points on specific races with more prize money. And so the prize money has kind of gone back and forth. And then obviously the challenge races have come through, the PTO has come through. So there's a massive dynamic shift toward the very top end and the top echelon of triathletes. But back then it was more grassroots almost, where, if you had a pro card, you could potentially go into like a race like the PTO. I mean, obviously that amount of money wasn't in the races, but I found that there was more open access to races for athletes. Like for me to race a PTO race, not that I would be very competitive at that right now, but I can't. I have to be approved. I have to have a wild card to get in if I'm not one of the athletes. Whereas back then you could go into a race and there was never a closing period. You could just jump into a pro race. So I felt it was a little bit more open-ended for a lot of up-and-coming athletes to come and try to make money.
Do you know why that changed?
I have no idea. Actually, that's a really good question. That's something I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say, there's been some pretty big financial backers for certain arenas. Like there's been triathlon series that have started and kind of gone away. I mean, the PTO is done by one man and he has a lot of money. So I think the dynamics have shifted in that sense. I mean, CEOs of Ironman has changed. I mean, there's a lot of things that have changed, and I think the focus of where Ironman was at the time has shifted a little bit more. But then now it's coming back with the Ironman series they have out. I just think they're getting a little bit more professional in the sense of like, here's one avenue you can go to make some money versus here's a bunch of races that now have pros to them. So I think they're getting a little bit more honed in that sense. And I think it's just the nature of the sport. I mean, things change all the time, but you kind of just have to roll with the punches and see what happens. But I mean, I feel like over the 15 years I've been racing and stuff, things have changed dramatically. But so have I. So it's kind of like I was a little baby, an infant, and I had to learn all this stuff, and everything was grassroots to me, and back then I look back and it seemed all grassroots, but now it's not. But in one sense, if I was starting out again, I think it would still be grassroots, because you can get your pro card and go into a pro race still and do the same thing that I did. It just maybe not as many races available, but there's still a ton of races, but now they're like all over the world, whereas there was many, many races in the US when I first started, or at least it seemed like it.
Okay. All right. So you, after all those years of racing 70.3, what made you go to Ironman distance?
Well, I started being coached by Mark Allen, and obviously he's Mark Allen. And I really read a lot of books by him. Well, stuff that he wrote to me personally, and I just idolized him, to be honest. I worked with one of his advisors, Phil Maffetone, as well, who is was basically the basis of heart rate training back then. It was the Maffetone method, and he saw that I was more of a diesel engine, and him and Mark basically showed me that maybe this is something that I could be good at. And so we decided to do Lake Tahoe, which was one of the hardest Ironmans when it was out there. And that race, I went up there 2 weeks prior, and it snowed the day before. And so the whole race was a huge adventure on my end, but it was an experience I loved. And then I ended up just going all into Ironman. I mean, I still did halves, but I definitely got the bug after doing that race.
Okay. So that was 2013. You did Tahoe and then just started. Yep.
Mhm.
So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about your race in Australia. You mentioned that when we did
Yes.
your sort of overview at the beginning. So,
Mhm.
okay. So
Yes.
by
Okay.
that point, you've
So
raced a lot
yeah,
of
so back
Ironmans,
then,
right?
yeah. So back then, when if you wanted to get to world championships, you had to collect points, and you could get certain points from 70.3, and you could get a certain number of points from Ironman. So I've always wanted to go to Australia, and a friend of mine was going to come with me, and so we went 3 weeks early. We did all the right things. We had a homestay there, and was all ready for the race, but I didn't really know much about nutrition. Mark never really talked a lot about nutrition with me, but I knew about the core diet, and I knew about Jesse because I trained with Doug McLean when I lived in Boulder, Colorado, and also Tucson. So I knew about Jesse, and my old coach prior to Mark really followed Jesse because they were kind of all together in the same arena and era, I guess you could say, where they were the main coaches. And so I knew of him, and I talked to him a little bit, but I ended up going with Mark. So I ended up going to this race, and oh my gosh, it was the most disastrous race I've ever had. I got off the bike in second. It was a very big race. It was super exciting. But by mile 8, I literally could not control my GI system and ended up just soiling my entire body. It was so terrible. And I couldn't even get to the toilet in time. I basically just, it was all over me. So it was very, very devastating to me. And by mile 10, I literally was passed by 3 athletes that I knew were coached by Jesse. And I was like, I need to talk to him because I'm obviously doing something wrong. And so as soon as I got back from that race back home, I called him and we talked. And I basically told him my nutrition plan, which was no plan at all. It was terrible. I had watermelon the day before, which, runs right through you. Um, and he started getting me on a path of proper nutrition. And so I really followed that. And then I ended up saying, well, why don't you just coach me? Because obviously I love what we're doing together. So he ended up starting to coach me, and he coached me through my first Ironman win. I went to Chattanooga, and I ended up winning the race. And he was my coach for many, many years. And then I transferred over to Tim for a little bit. And then I went back to Jesse, and then I went back to Tim. So I've been with QT2 for a number of years, probably, I mean, gosh, that was 2014, I think, or 2015. So almost about 10 years, I guess I've been with QT2.
Yeah, long time.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
curious though, because I mean, 2015. So by that point, you've been racing 10 years.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, so when I did my first race, it was literally that pool swim. And then I
Yeah.
went a year and a half later and
Okay.
then went to triathlon. So it was quite, so I really started being a pro, like got that pro card. That first year I think I was 27 or 28.
Okay.
So yeah,
But
so I mean,
how'd you just
I
how'd you get through so many races without a nutrition plan? Like, I'm just curious.
it was sheer determination. I mean, I think I think in a half you can fake it quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew sports drink. I knew you had to have at least a bottle of sports drink. But I do recall having 2 Cliff Bars like before the race. I just thought that was the thing to do. I don't know why there's balloons. That's odd. And by the time I would cross that finish line, I would run to the bathroom, like literally run to the bathroom. So I was on a fine line of like devastation. So when I jumped to Ironman, I mean, that's when nutrition can really hit you, especially. So I got lucky, is what I would say.
So what kind of changes did Jesse make from a nutrition standpoint?
The biggest thing was actually having a plan, and figuring out how many carbs and how and what I was ingesting. So I really wasn't taking any fueling during the race. I knew I took sports drink. So
Mhm.
he changed my pre-race plan completely. I mean, I took out all fiber, like the standard stuff that, you would think you would know. But I just knew nothing about sodium. I never really put in a lot of thought process in it, because I never really had issues until after the race. And I just thought, well, I raced hard. So it wasn't until Ironman that I really was like, something's wrong. Like this, like no one else is doing this except me. So he did that, and he provided me a plan. Like he said, okay, every 30 minutes, take a gel. You're going to drink sports drink. You're going to pee 3 times on, or 2 times on the bike in an Ironman. Like just the very basics of standard, like the standard protocols that we use with QT2 and the core diet. And it changed me like that. It was a dramatic shift. And I remember when he first started with me, it was actually quite hard for me to comprehend like how much gels and sugars I had to take in. I mean, I think a lot of people, when they come into the sport, especially females, are like, oh, you go ride for a couple hours and you're back and you're fine and you don't have to eat till dinner, because you just get used to that idea. You want to lose weight, you want to get fit. You think if you don't eat as much, you're going to get fitter and stronger. And I mean, that's completely absurd, obviously, but I think a lot of people come in with that mentality because of our diet culture and everything. So it was a huge shift. And I remember him calling me a number of times during the week, because I mean, he knew that I just wasn't really taking the knowledge in and actually putting it into practice. And so he was on me very, very much. And that helped a ton. And I remember one day I was in Bend, Oregon. I was there for the summer, and I got back from a ride and I was just completely done, like completely done. And I still had an hour runoff. And so I was texting him. I'm like, I don't think I can run. It was a really hard ride. Da, 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 da. And he's like, put some sports drink in a bottle and drink the entire bottle and go run. And I did. And I had the best run, because he basically knew I wasn't taking nutrition. And so that's all I needed to get through that. And so that was one of the big milestones, was learning proper nutrition. And it really, really did change things for me. So
Okay. So, I mean, but, all right, so you figured out your nutrition, you got it, but you stayed now with QT2 for 10 years. So what else?
what was it and why?
Yeah.
Well, it works.
Yeah. Yeah, it works.
Well, I mean, I was really involved with Jesse. He took a lot of time with me, and he was really invested. I wasn't used to having that type of coach with me that was really supportive, and he would call me, and he was just really into the sport. And so I loved learning from him and learning the stuff. So when I said, well, why don't you just coach me? It was like, I went all in. Sorry, excuse me. I went all in with it. And I mean, obviously when we did Chattanooga and I won, I drank the Kool-Aid, like I'm in. And so I just believed in the process. I mean, it just dramatically changed who I was as an athlete. I continue to win a number of races. And I mean, once you go to something that works, you don't really want to change it. And I actually did 3 years ago, I did switch to a different coach. I was going through different things in my life, and I thought, I should probably try something different. And I did. I left for about 3 months. And at the time, I was really, really nervous, because this is a big change when you do that. And I went to a different coach, and I got to the start line of an Ironman, and I knew I wasn't ready. I knew I didn't do the work. And I even though we did work and it was different, I just knew inside I was not ready. And I had a terrible race. And maybe part of that was mentality, but I knew my numbers. I've been doing this for so long. So then I ended up going back to QT2. So I did leave for like a very brief stint, like 3 months, but yeah, I came back right away.
All right. Well, that's part of the learn.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
so now after that first race, Chattanooga 2015. So, but you keep coming back, right? So lots of races, and do you see, where are you in your pro career now, do you think?
I'm pretty well at that point. I actually, so before that race, and before I was at 70.3 Worlds in Vegas, and I came out of the water really, really strong. This was before I was with Jesse, and I ended up crashing in that race, and I had road rash, literally like the worst road rash. Like I ended up gliding into the road, and I had road rash all over my body. It was completely red. And I ended up finishing that race, and it just made headlines. Like it was massive. And I ended up getting like 6 calls from bike companies, and I mean, I just had an influx of people calling me. And so I was completely overwhelmed because I was just finishing the race because I was determined. And I ended up getting a manager at the time who kind of helped navigate me a little bit in terms of trying to sign on with certain sponsors. And so that was kind of the building block for me to actually go and like consider myself and see myself as a pro when I started getting some contracts under me. And then that helped me, gain some momentum in going to races, the confidence that comes from that, and kind of progress from there. I always wanted to get to Kona. That was always my biggest thing. I've had many ups and downs. I've been sick, I've been injured. I mean, I've had surgeries, I've had all sorts of things. And it's just I have tenacity and grit that I mean, or I'm just pure stubborn. I don't know. I love the sport. I love what triathlon is, and the community and just the way of life. And so you fall 8 times or you fall 7 times, you get up 8. I mean, that's just me in a nutshell.
So, so you did make it to Kona, right?
I did, yes. I was actually coached by Jesse, and I ended up getting Lyme disease. I really had a really bad bout with it, and I was treating it, and I was bed bound for at least a month. It was terrible. It was truly a really, really hard time. And I went and got coached by Tim, and he helped me through that process a lot. And he asked me one day, what do you want? Like, what's your goal this year? And I said, I would love to get to Kona. And he's like, all right, we're going to do it. And he had as much faith in me as I had the dream alive in me. And I think that support system was extremely, I mean, that's what made it, And so we just started racing. And at the time, it was all about points still. So I flew and did races in Europe. I did all sorts of things. I could barely finish the races, but I ended up getting a little bit of points here, a little bit of points there. I mean, I think my first race, my first Ironman back, I think I ran like 4 hours. Like it was, I could barely get to the finish, It was, my body just was wrecked. But we ended up getting enough points, and I got onto that start line, and that was in 2018. And I was just so over the moon with it that it was like a dream come true. So every little thing was just a blessing. And I went to that race with so much gratefulness, and I ended up having the race of my life. I mean, I placed 8th. I had a phenomenal race. I mean, I was the black sheep in that race, like I shouldn't have been there, to be honest. And I just had the race of my life. It was fantastic. So it was very good. I did actually qualify and race Kona a few years prior to that. And that was with Jesse. I got to Kona. But I had a foot issue. And so I didn't run for a week and a half before that race because it got worse and worse. And I ended up doing the swim and hobbling through transition. Got on the bike. I think I got off the bike in 4th. Had an amazing, but my foot was just blown up. Like it was twice its size. I just couldn't run. And that was a very long process, but long story short, I actually had a broken bone in my foot that got misdiagnosed for over a year. And finally got it fixed after a year of going to California, going all over to see these doctors that just couldn't figure out what it was. But it was a very small fracture in one of the small bones, way up high in the talus area, and in the very much of the ankle. And so no one saw it, and it took a number of doctors to finally get it diagnosed. So but yeah, my Kona race in 2018 was one I'm very proud of, definitely.
So when you race, do you feel like you have a strength from swim, bike, run, like the area that you excel in most, or
I mean, I'm definitely the bike. I've always been pretty strong in that arena. I mean, even last year I had some really strong, I was the first off the bike, fastest bike split. So the bike for sure, then the run, then the swim. My swim is interesting. I mean, you can make gains in the swim, but it's pretty like slow moving, you know? Um, so it's definitely the bike for sure. And if I had to look back of where that came from, the only thing that I can think of, I was always a track athlete. I ran track as a kid and I loved it. I went to school for it, you know. But my parents never really gave me an investment in my sport. They never saw it as something to actually do. They were all about just get a job after school. And so they never actually went to one track meet of mine when I was in high school, not one. And I would ride my mountain bike back and forth to track practice. I was 14. I'd ride 7 miles there and 7 miles back, do track practice. I'd get home in the pitch dark. And so I think I just had to learn how to ride, you know, to get where I was. And my dad was a bodybuilder when I was growing up. And I remember when I was 4 or 5, I just would follow him. And we ended up going to the gym a lot. And I just loved doing leg weights. And so I did a lot of weights when I was a kid. I went to the gym when I was 12 and just, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I just did leg press with my dad and squats and whatever I could with my legs. I was always strong with my legs. And so um, that is kind of my theory behind why I was strong on a bike right away.
Okay. And you took that, I mean, you also do gravel racing, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, during COVID, you know, everything was shut down. There was no triathlons, there was indoor races. I did a ton of, and I got completely burnt out. But then things started to slowly open up, and I got a gravel bike. And to this day, I remember that very first ride, and I was in love. I was like, I feel like a kid again because I literally could go up this grassy hill and down on this embankment, and I was like on a road bike, and it was just fantastic. So I really fell in love with it. And at the time, my bike sponsor the following year, sorry, just getting over cold. My bike sponsor had a slot to Unbound, which is a massive gravel race. It's like the most famous gravel race in the US. It's 200 miles, and you hear horror stories about how crazy and hard it is. But they had an entry, and they asked if I wanted it, and I said yes. And so I kind of went in there completely blinded. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And so it was very much grassroots for me. And I got to that start line and I thought, just have fun with it. I mean, I love to ride a bike and let's just see what happens. And I ended up having a great race. I placed 6th overall. And it just catapulted me again, like into this new whole arena. And so I started doing different gravel races. And then the Lifetime Grand Prix series started, which is a series of 6 races. At the time, it was 5. It turned to 6. Now it's 7, I believe. And I raced that for 2 years. You have to apply for it. So I applied both those years and raced. And I just started racing a bunch of gravel races and then started doing Ironman at the same time. So my athletic career kind of transferred over to doing a variety of adventures. And I mean, as you get older, you kind of have to look at different types of avenues. And so that's kind of what I did. And a lot of my partners and sponsors were jumping into gravel, so they really supported that side of things. And so I still to this day do both. But when I first started, I raced a ton. I mean, I went everywhere. I did Leadville, I did all sorts of things, and it was super fun and very tough. Like I think Ironman's tough. Sometimes these gravel races are intense, definitely. But
So when do you
yeah.
rest? Like,
Well, injured. No, joking, but you have to. Um, I mean, it's just the mentality of everyone. You have a race season, you take your 2 weeks off in winter, you slowly progress. I've been coached by Tim a lot, and Tim and I work really, really well together. He knows me extremely well, and he works with my dreams and my obsessions and my desires, I guess. And so he's always thought outside the box ever since I had that Lyme bout and getting me to Kona. We had to really think outside the box to get me there. Like we had to figure out what races to go to, and he was always about trying, and I really grabbed onto that, and he helped support me. So whenever I have these grandiose ideas, he actually comes up with ideas as well. And so it's a combo effort. And sometimes we can get in trouble because I do race a lot. But he also, like, we've learned together what I can and can't handle. But I'm always someone like, the worst case scenario, it's not going to go well. So let's just try. I, I, I'm not afraid to fail is basically what it comes down to. I mean, you get to a start line and you don't have any control of what's happening. You can just put your best foot forward. And so if that best foot forward is a failure in some aspect, then so be it. I mean, I'm okay with that versus not getting to that start line and trying. And so to go back to your question of when do I rest, I mean, I do rest when I need it. I think over the years, you learn what you can and can't handle. If there's not a rest day on the schedule and I feel completely annihilated, I take that day, and I think it's the confidence of knowing when you can't push. But I definitely do take a break in the winter for sure. So
Okay, that's
yeah,
good.
I have to. I mean, everybody does, for sure.
All right, so I want to switch gears a little bit because you have also given back to the sport a
Mhm.
lot.
Mhm.
And so maybe you can talk about a race
Yeah,
like a girl, how it started,
yeah,
like, and what
definitely.
you've done with it.
Yeah, so when I started the sport, one of the things that Ironman really did was provide us homestays. So we could reach out to Ironman and say, "Hey, I'm doing a race in Seattle, and is there any opportunities for homestay?" So a homestay is when they would bring in a pro to their house and basically take care of them, and it was so amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I met so many different families and kids, and I really got connected with a community that I never knew was even available to me because I traveled to train in Tucson. I went to Boulder. I was very recluse at the time. I didn't have a lot of friends that I could really go to, or even a community, because I just bounced everywhere. I didn't have a home. I bounced from homes to shelters to whatever I could. So I I in 2016 or 2017, I was going through a divorce. I got married eventually, and it was a very short stint. And I moved to Colorado. I went to Boulder, and I just felt lost. And I really struggled. I didn't have a community. I didn't have any of my family around. I was on my own. And I sat one day and I thought, this this is triathlon. There's a massive community out there. I've met so many amazing people out there, and I had a really big desire to help female athletes. Like I wanted to give back in some way to what I was been provided, and I felt alone, and so I started putting things to paper, and I thought, what if I could create a community where I could get someone from Seattle, someone from Florida, that could meet up in Colorado and race as friends, and create a community of these people all over the country, basically like homestays or support networks, and put that online. So I launched I Race Like a Girl with that intention, is bringing women together in sports, supporting them, providing as much education as I could, and just creating an environment where women could thrive. I met a lot of moms. I've met a lot of people that didn't really have the connection with their community or their triathlon clubs, and they wanted like-minded females. And when you start that rock moving, it goes, like when you see someone else do something, then it gives you the confidence that you can do it. And so that was what I really wanted to instill in people, because I mean, that's how I started this sport. I met an Olympian when I was in 8th grade, and she changed my life. Like, I saw that, if you ran and you had passion, you could do something with that. And no one else showed me that in my life. And I remember I was in the hospital for something, and she found out, and she wrote me this letter, and it was like have faith in yourself. get healthy, be strong, like you like follow your dreams. And it just changed my mindset. So I had all that in me and I just wanted to create something. And so I Race Like a Girl was launched. I created a website. I started things. I reached out to all my partners at the time and gave them my ideas. And they said, yeah, we'll support that. So I got some free product. I got free gear. I gave everybody as much product and gear as I could. I think that first year, everyone got a free race kit. And then I just had so much things that I could give back. And it really, really created a very cohesive environment. So that was in 2017. And since then, it just kind of has progressed and built itself. It's still a very close knit connection. And I've met some of my best friends there. A gal on the team reached out to me during COVID, and I ended up living in her cottage for over 2 years. And now I live on the Cape because of her. It was her that literally brought me to this community, and it was all because of I Race Like a Girl. That's how we got connected, and I have really close friends from that community. And then when I jumped into gravel, there was such a discrepancy on the amount of females on the start line, and I thought, what if we could create something like this on the gravel side? And so that's when Girls Get Gritty was born. And just to put like a whole thing about the word girl, I've always had the mentality that it's not a bad word, and I think it's had a really bad rap. As females, as we get older, we get suppressed and we don't get to have the joy that we had as we were young kids. And so I wanted to bring that back. I want you to be a girl again. I want you to have that joy. When you go out and ride your bike, you feel like a kid again. You're having fun. You're bringing joy to what you're doing. And so to race like a girl is that inner girl that's inside all of us that we all just want, like we desperately want out, and we feel like we have to hold it in because of society norms and just things that we have to be a certain way. And we don't have to be. As a kid, you could be whatever you wanted. You could be Superwoman, And so I really take it to heart that like I Race Like a Girl embodies doing things that you've always wanted to do and following your dreams and passions and having that network and that support and confidence. And I mean, we have moms on the team that have little girls and they wear our stuff. I mean, that's the whole part of that process is building from the ground up, and not only from a female perspective, but a little kid perspective at the same time that's female. And now the team we have women that are in their 20s. I think our oldest member is 81 years old. Like it's awesome. Like I mean, they are my idols. I've had gravel camps where we had 2 women that were 66 years old, and they are the most badass women I know. Like it's just, I learned from them, and we have talks about menopause and all sorts of things that come up, and it's a really awesome community to be in because you don't get too often where it's just females only, and being able to go into a network and ask questions and find friendships that is just female. So it's pretty special to me, definitely.
So how did you do that virtually? I find I've tried to do virtual communities
I mean,
and
if you have a will, you have a way, right? I literally, honestly, at the time created a website. I made a website. I put out a blanket post that I'm starting this Women for Community. Come join us. And I had a few like Triathlete magazine, I think was online at the time, or X Tri or something. They wrote an article about it. At the time when I was sponsored by Pearl Izumi and Shimano, at the same time, they did an article on it. So I just got exposure that way and just had open invitation for whoever wanted to come. And so it started slowly. I had 20 members when it first started, and things word of mouth, you get out there, you talk, and if you just continue to build what you love, I mean, I think it'll be built.
yeah.
So
Is it the members that are on the team, are they coached normally, or is it just like
they can be coached. So I started coaching when I was like my third year in triathlon. Like just from my experience as a physical therapist, I already had my strength coaching from college. I had all this stuff, and I actually started a company when I was 18 called Able Bodies, and I did personal training in the pool when I was a lifeguard and created all that stuff. So I've always kind of been this entrepreneur thought process type person. And so when I started coaching and doing Angela Naeth coaching, I opened it up to the community. So if they wanted to have support, they could come, and I'd help them. And during COVID and kind of during that, I would do bi-weekly Zoom calls and just do question and answer and just kind of help support the teams and the team members. And then eventually some of the athletes on there, I do coach now. And so there's a mix of both my coaching side business, and then some of them are on the team. But when they're on the team, they can be coached, they can be part of any team. It's literally a community. Like there's no requirements, there's nothing. You just want to be part of something awesome, basically.
Okay.
And so that's kind of the mentality that we have, and it's very all inclusive. The more the merrier, basically. So
Okay. All right. So just a couple more questions.
yeah,
Now
no
that
problem.
you've been, in the sport for, 15, 20 years. If
20
you,
years. I don't know. That's a long
20
time.
years, yeah. All right. So knowing everything that you do now, would you have done anything differently at the beginning?
I mean, you could always say woulda, coulda, shoulda. I like, you learn as you live life. And so what I know now, if I knew that back then, I mean, I probably would have taken a different course of action for sure, because my knowledge would have been a lot more. But in the sense of what I did, no, I mean, I did the best I could every day I could. I mean, you can only, I never live in the past, to be honest. I've made mistakes. If I were to look back, like, oh, I could have done better there. I should have done that. But I mean, I didn't know at the time. I did what I could at the time. And um, so no, I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, it made me who I am today, and I love who I am.
Yeah.
I love what I do.
So if someone came to you as, they're up and coming triathlete and like, I want to race pro, what advice would you give to them?
My first advice would actually to find a really good coach, and do your research on that. I think if you had the support network, and learned from someone who really understood anatomy, biology, physiology, and really had the experience as a coach, I think first and foremost, I would say get that, because that's your guiding light, when I went to QT2 and learned about nutrition, it completely changed my athletic career. So that's first and foremost. And to believe in yourself. I know it sounds cliche, but like, you're the one that's going to get yourself to the start line, and you can't find external support. Like you need to have that internal desire and passion, and to really sit down with yourself and ask yourself if you have that, because you need it. If you really want to pursue something like this, you have to have that drive inside. And so having a real conversation with yourself, I think putting pen to paper and really laying out, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to try to get your pro card? Is it because of status? Is it because you think it's going to make you a better person? I mean, those are all wrong, and so you really need to sit down and be real. And I think if you can find those answers and you have that, then I think you already know your answer of what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Angela. It's been a
Yeah,
real
of course.
pleasure talking to you today. And you're very inspiring.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a sport I love, and I love the triathlon community, coaching athletes and helping support friends that are on the start line. I mean, it's just awesome, and I couldn't even imagine life without doing this sport. Even all the times that I've been on the sidelines or injured, I've come to races and supported others. And, I get a huge passion for helping people. And when you get to like, now that I'm still an athlete and I still want to do the best I can, but now that I've kind of transferred over into like, the role of being a coach as well, and having my having a business and these communities and camps that I do and stuff, that it has given me so much joy. Like when I have athletes on the start line, like for Ironman Lake Placid, I have a number of athletes on that start line. It's exciting to follow them and to see their changeovers. I have some athletes that will probably turn pro, and just to see their drive and their excitement when they come back from a race, and even the pitfalls. Like I have athletes that have not good races, and we go through that process and learning, and it's really an honor, and something I'm very grateful to be part of someone else's life in that way. I don't have kids, and so I love that I get to be in part and in some fashion change people's lives for the better, through 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 connection of triathlon. I mean, like that's a dream come true.
It is. It is. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll see you at Lake Placid.
Yes.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.